I feel like a lot of people, myself included, for a long time, kind of just thought once you get into a certain role, like, all right, if you get whatever promoted to a higher position, if you become the boss, then you automatically have these preconceived, the classics is, oh, a leader is just firm and authoritative. That's what I thought my whole life is like, all right, if you're in charge, if you're the boss, people better listen to you, and you got to be firm. Not so much what I think now as a leader of like, all right, listening, taking both sides, and basically just kind of being whatever type of person you are.
Well, you need both. I mean, like, because the leader can't be so wishy-washy that no one respects them, right? Like, you need someone who you can trust will take authority when they need to. But yeah, I think we both agree that, like, you need to take in a bunch of different viewpoints. Like, the best leader is the person who can take in all the different viewpoints and sort of make some kind of effective action based on that. Mm-hmm. Where you're not being too authoritative, but you're also not completely conforming to the group.
Yeah.
I remember when I started filmmaking, like one of the first lessons, because it's like so complicated to make a film, I knew a bunch of people that are trying to get into directing. What's the best way to direct the team and all this? And like something that was so obvious to me once I saw it done and then I tried to replicate it is sort of like getting the team together is a lot of your job. Like getting the right people in the right roles and making sure they understand what the basic premise is, like what we're trying to do with this film or whatever. And then just delegating, trusting them, right? Like you give them a lot of respect. And it's like, if you're the cameraman, I don't have to tell you every single composition and every single move. I'm going to trust that you're going to make good decisions. And then it turns out that they do, because that's why you have them there. Like you don't need to be micromanaging everything.
The primo example, which I think I've said before, is like George Washington, who, didn't ask for really power, didn't ask to be in charge. He just knew like who to keep around him. Like he was not nearly as like quick-witted or smart as like Hamilton, who he made his treasurer, I think. And then Jefferson was like this fucking deep thinking, insane, like just beyond smart. He just knew who to have around. Like there's no way we would have the Constitution that they made if Washington tried to make the Constitution. It would be awful, or like it would just be like we would have no rules right now. But he knew who to trust and who to run with, and then like we said, knew when to say, all right, you know what, we can't do that, or just like little, make some decisions and make calls. But I mean, that's what I think is lost on a leader nowadays. It's more acquiring the team.
I haven't seen Hamilton, so I actually don't know anything about this part of history.
That's the only reason I know anything about Hamilton, is mainly that musical, which you should listen to.
Well, welcome to the Brothers Dim. This is an interesting talk show podcast. I don't know what the fuck we're doing. Yeah, we don't yet know what the show is, and we're going to be very flexible, and I think the whole thing will remain plastic for a while until we hone in and fine-tune what we want to be doing.
Yeah.
I'm not even certain of the name, Brothers Dim. Like, I like that idea, but it comes from Brothers Grimm, which is like folk tales. And that also is somewhat relevant because like I like putting everything into a narrative. Like that's the best way I understand things. Like I struggle with a textbook or a lecture, but when you tell me a story, the themes really affect me. Like I can be emotionally brought along and then I sort of learn the lesson you're supposed to learn. But I typed in Brothers Dim into Google and I saw some other people that use that title. And I saw, like, there's like some kind of a theater group or something, and I saw their pictures on Facebook, and looking at them pissed me off. I did not like the look of them. I have no idea what they're doing, but the fact that they use that name and I got annoyed just by looking at them makes me wonder if we should stick with that name or if we can come up with a better one.
Well, I like the dim part because I just feel so stupid. Like I like the dim part because I just feel like that all the time. Like I'm dumb I'm slow. Like I honestly feel super slow. And whenever and like I'm in a decent position of power at my job, and it's still like I'm like fuck, man. Sometimes it's just like I can't process, and it's got to be simpler for me to understand it. So I mean that that's the part that I like.
I mean, that's our superpower, I think, is being able, because I think you need to exist in this realm in between, where on one far end of the spectrum is a complete celebration of stupidity. Like, fuck it, we're stupid, we're going to be stupid forever, intellectuals are stupid, everyone is stupid. Like I hate celebrating stupidity. And then the other side of the spectrum is the highbrow intellectual who's read a lot and is very confident in everything they say. But I also don't trust them because you have all these intellectuals and people who are really well educated and they still don't agree on very core principles. And so it's like, well, you can have so much background and understand so much about the world and still be wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's impossible for me to reach for that, I guess, for both of us, right? Like, we're never going to be profoundly educated, but we're still trying to be introspective and figure things out the best we can and just exist in that middle area.
And we'll probably disagree on this, but, you know, if you have all this, you could cite all this info and have all these, whatever, sources and facts. Who cares if, you know, the layman doesn't understand what you're saying? Or I think there is something to keep, you know, dumbing something down.
I remember being really frustrated and annoyed growing up at people who I saw as kind of snooty or snobby, where you could tell that they were using jargon and language to be condescending. The fact that they have to put on a show to perform how smart they are, I just find really frustrating. Like, you need to be able to communicate with everyone, right? So, like, it doesn't matter how intelligent you are if you still can't communicate the ideas in a way that people can hear them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that you need to talk always to a general audience. Like, I don't know that you always have to make the stupidest Hollywood movie that is just fart humor and whatever the lowest common denominator so that it does well internationally and everyone loves it. That too, I want to exist in the middle where I'm not sinking to the lowest, but I want to find people who can communicate to me who are not using jargon just to throw me off.
And even for them, I think, like, maybe you understand it intellectually, but what if you don't understand it emotionally?
The way I sort of encountered that was my friends growing up were very literal minded. They were like engineering types. They've all gone into like different kinds of programming and working with computers. So they would understand these high level things. And then if I were to turn it into a metaphor or somehow make it more artistic, right? Where like I'm not being literal, I am morphing it and showing it in a different way, that they would find sort of unacceptable. Like, they could only communicate in that higher level language. And as soon as you started to morph it through art, that they would be very critical. And because things weren't logically linked one to one, because you can't take like some big intellectual idea and translate it exactly into a painting or a song or a story where you're literally getting every idea across one at a time. Like, you have to translate it and morph it and get the bigger theme, right? The like you're saying, the emotion of the idea. Mm-hmm. Like, how can you communicate that? And that's, you know, I exist way more in that world. Mm-hmm. I cannot understand the literal world. I understand movies and dumber things.
Yeah. And that, I feel like that's almost, in my opinion, more true, or, you know, because life and these whatever answers or whatever, they're going to be vague. They're not really concrete. I mean, there's, you know, facts or science or whatever, but I think that's more true to, I mean, this is a generalization, but, you know, it being kind of vague and, I don't know, more emotional, like you said, more artistic, is more relevant than to have all the Webster's dictionary answers or whatever, have it all like mapped out. It's like, well, where does that get you? I mean, beyond like as a doctor or something where you need to know all this shit.
Yeah, I think it's a much more human level understanding. Like, I think math and logic is a computer language. Like, that's the way that computers will communicate with each other. And as humans, some of us can understand it at a really high level and break down the math and use it to communicate ideas. But for, 100,000 years or however long, we've been communicating ideas by telling stories. And stories around the campfire. Like, this idea I found really exciting when I was a kid because I loved movies and I wanted to get into making movies. But it also seemed kind of stupid. It's like you're going to spend your whole life making movies. There's something frivolous about that, or it's not serious. I don't know. And then I read or I saw some like Joseph Campbell, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, sort of pointing out that we have these deep stories in culture that go back thousands of years. And if you tell a story for hundreds of years, there's some deep meaning to it that you're communicating. Like, there's a reason it's sticking around. And so it is more meaningful than math on a human level, I think. Like, we've evolved for storytelling, and then we've figured out math and logic. But I don't think humans don't inherently arrive at math and logic automatically. Like, that's something you have to sort of learn. But storytelling is instinctive.
Yeah, and good point. And what's affected humanity more?
Well, storytelling didn't get us to the moon and didn't give us the internet, but
no, but it had massive, like the Crusades, wars,
lots of great things.
Yeah, you tell a story about I won't even pick a religion, but some deity that has extra answers,
and then you have a really good reason to go kill a bunch of other people who believe in a different god. Yeah,
and that affects humans more. The general humans are like, oh my god, that story's sunk in deep. I don't want to go to a bad place or sin or do something. That story hit me super fucking hard. And I mean, that I feel like has influenced humanity more than, like going to the moon and stuff is good. But since before all that, the beginning of time, it was like a story is going to shape a whole society of what you're going to believe in, what you're going to do. How you're going to live your life.
I've been a little bit bummed out lately in that it's hard to find stories that have spoken to a really wide audience and then also speak to me. Like, when I was growing up, there would be these big blockbuster movies. Like The Matrix is obviously a good example because like a lot of our pop culture still we're using language invented in The Matrix. Like, that movie seemed like so important because it's communicating certain ideas and it's doing it to a huge audience. So many people love it. And I don't know, what's a movie that has come out lately that's been hugely popular that had an interesting theme? Fast and Furious 7, 8, 9? Which one of those had a really, interesting theme that's actually helping you evolve as a human being?
Avengers Endgame.
What? That's a good example of something that's massively popular. And I'm sure that we could pick themes out of it. I'm not so sure that any of them are very deep. Like, those movies are not constructed around very deep ideas. I don't think. I might be missing them if they're there. What's Avengers about?
Well, I mean, I was only thinking about Thanos as the bad guy. Had good intentions. Weird way of getting there where it wasn't just he wanted to hurt people. He saw that everyone was suffering, I guess, because of too many people, too much population. So if he culls the cattle, kills half of humanity, then the rest thrive. So it's like the tough decision. He's making the tough decision for the benefit of all humanity.
But the mistake that he's making, right, is being too authoritarian. So he's seeing a problem, and then he's deciding what the solution is, and damn the rest of people, they don't actually, I'm just going to make the decision for everyone because I know better than the universe. Similarly to the Bill Gates wanting to shoot clouds of dirt into the sky or whatever and fix global warming or whatever that was. Now we have these, Bezos can sort of make a decision that's almost like on a Thanos level and change the whole world if he wants.
Yeah.
I found it disturbing that I ran like a tabletop RPG or like, one of those role-playing games where you roll dice with some people over Zoom. And I had a similar character, like a character who was making a decision, and you could see it from his point of view, but because he's making it on the behalf of all of humanity, it's wrong. But I was disturbed by the fact that the group, they were very willing to go along with the Thanos decision. I think especially in modern times where things are so political, where like they all fall on one side of the political spectrum, and if they could snap their fingers and have all the people on the other side of the political spectrum disappear, they might do it. And they didn't see that as a moral failing. Like, that was my core thing of like, it's not right to make this decision. You can't just wipe out all the people you don't like. But a few of them are kind of thinking, well, maybe, like, obviously, if you support this president or that president, you're a bad person. So you should just disappear. And that, I found that really disturbing.
Yeah, like, especially right now, just in people that I've talked to and conversations that I've had, it's the whole, like, you know, these people, their IQ is too low to vote. They're just, you know, they shouldn't be doing it. It's wrong. If we could just, you know, herd them together and get them gone. I think sadly, you're right. Like, the reality is if there's more people that are in that boat than you would expect, even like just right now, especially how polarized we are.
I think that's a failing of storytelling. I mean, that means that the point of the biggest movie, I mean, I think it might be the top grossing movie. I don't know. It's like really up there. Mm-hmm. It's been seen by an extraordinary amount of people, and still emotionally, they didn't get that message, right? They're still sort of willing to make the Thanos decision. It doesn't need to make a logical argument for why Thanos is wrong. It needs to make an emotional argument so that you're moved by the end of the movie, that you have a feeling that what Thanos did is wrong, and that feeling, the better the story is, the better the movie is, the more deeply that feeling sinks to where you, when in your own thinking, when you start to go, boy, I wish I could erase all the people that I disagree with, you would have that emotional, oh, that's wrong. That's immoral, right? Like, and you wouldn't need to intellectualize it or put it into words. You would have a feeling that that would be a victory of that movie.
So here's a couple examples that I'm thinking of. There's the Thanos example, and I've thought about this, and I'll give a real world example too. Then there's, I mean, this is, I guess, a little more of a specific audience, but there's the Itachi Uchiha, Sasuke's older brother, who murdered his entire ninja clan to prevent a war, which he told me about. So he murdered his own family and his entire clan to prevent probably a lot more people from dying. You know, so that's good. I mean, like, that's a good perspective. Like, you killed your mommy, you killed your dad, you killed your whole clan, which that just feels, you know, obviously wrong. But you maybe saved an extra 100,000 people as opposed to killing 1,000 or whatever it is.
You killed your family to save the wider community. Is that right?
And like what do you think?
And by the way, you're talking about Naruto, which at some point when you finish it, we're going to do a whole episode on it. Probably most people have not seen Naruto.
That's true.
What do I think? I don't know. Like, I don't have a firm stance on whether he is a bad guy or a good guy based on that decision. It's also complicated because, like, he's sort of being pushed to do that by the higher ups. So, like, he's listening to the wider community, and they're making a very harsh but maybe realistic decision that his family has to go. What's more important, your family or the wider community?
Yeah.
And that's very complicated, and I don't know.
I think about, like, I'll put it more vaguely. Like, I used to be annoyed at people who won't answer a hypothetical, you know, and I go, what if, all right, either you save you're holding two people over a lava pit, you drop one or the other, and they're always like, well, I would swing one to the left. I'm like, no, just answer the hypothetical. I used to hate it.
If you're going to give me hypothetical situations like that, I'm going to have a panic attack. I can't answer these kind of things. These are impossible.
The other example, the Golden Compass example. Do you remember that?
Remind me.
In order to open up the realm and to get out and to do, I kind of forget, to do something, he has to
sacrifice a child.
Yeah,
and it turns out to be one of the main characters. And so, exactly, as the reader, you're sort of like, horrified. And I think in that case, he is clearly a villain because he's not actually, he's doing that for the discovery of science. I don't think he was saving anyone.
But even if he was, it's kind of like, you're wrong. You know, you killed a child, an innocent child. No matter what happened after that, you're just wrong. Even if you saved, I don't know, it's just a weird area. If you saved 100 children, or you're still wrong. Like, you could have thought of a plan C or tried a plan C. Like, there's a limit where you can't cross it. Otherwise, you're just wrong. You're just bad. You gotta try, at least die trying to find a plan C. So there's always a plan C. I guess until there's not. And now I'll use a real world example.
Like you're saying, there's always a plan C, but I think that's not always the case, right? Sometimes you have to make a bad decision. Like that's the point of the trolley problem. You can't go, you pull the switch, you kill one person, but save 5. You can't go, well, I'm just going to do option C. Like it's a scenario where there's only 2 options.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm kind of trying to get at. That I used to hate when people were like, well, I would do this and jump around and do a backflip and do both, or try to do both.
I mean, if you put me in Itachi's position when that was happening, I would just have a panic attack. Like, I would fail to make a decision in that scenario. Like, I probably could not wipe out the clan, but I wouldn't necessarily think that's the right move. I would just be forced into inaction, analysis paralysis.
Yeah. The real world example, which makes me kind of contradict myself, is Winston Churchill, real life. I'm not, I don't know all the history, but in World War, II, he basically did a maneuver where he sent in, let's just say, 1,000 soldiers as a distraction to pull the army's attention, another army's attention away, to have, let's just call it 10,000 soldiers escape via the ocean, which is like exactly what happened. So 1,000 soldiers marched to a battle to their death, and 10,000 soldiers escaped and survived that would have been slaughtered. So it's like, fuck. All right, I guess I did contradict myself, because he made a really difficult decision that was definitely correct. There was no plan C. It was like, all right, 1,000 versus 10,000. And that's the challenge of a leader, is those decisions in general. It's like, you're going to help a certain amount of people and others are going to hurt. And it's like the classic, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
The war example is pretty straightforward, right? Like it's sacrificing 10,000 or sacrificing 1,000 to save 10,000. But what if those 1,000 people you were closer to, right? Like their family. And that's what creates like the interesting story. And that's why Naruto is interesting, because it's sort of very difficult to answer that question. And so it becomes really dramatic, and you stretch it out for 700 episodes or whatever.
Yeah, it's like almost, we're not obviously gonna come up with an answer. It's almost impossible.
I think like in the words you're using, or like the way you're describing it, I think in a lot of cases there is an option C, but the question is how squeezed are you for time? Because if Churchill had 100 years to think about it, he might have come up with a better solution where less people had to die. But you're in war and you've got to do something now, and you know there's only so much time to think.
I think I have a semi-answer, and I'll put this in a simpler example of myself. If there is a way to put it back on the other person, on the other side, to let them make the choice. And so my example, which I did recently, which is like a really low stakes version of this. All right, so one of my tenants, I'm a property manager. We have some blanket policies where it's like, all right, you're assigned a parking spot. That's your spot, and we don't do switcheroos because it's just not fair. Then everyone's going to want to switch around. Oh, my spot's too small, blah, blah, blah. And so tenants saying, I need to switch spots. I'm against the wall. My spot's too small for the new car that I bought. And it's a really obnoxious, aggressive tenant that's like, well, how, my car can't fit here and all this and blah, blah, blah. It's not going to let it go. It's going to make your life hell. Typically, I would just say, look, here's the policy, and it's not fair for me to break it. So that's just a no. You're in the spot you're assigned. Sorry. And I came up with a solution to just put it on her instead. So I said, all right, you know what? You can switch spots and it costs you $25 a month. Something like that, where it's like, you make the decision. Like, all right, I can't be unfair. You're not going to turn me into a liar. Like, say I give it to her and somebody else asks me, oh, I can't, then I'm a liar. It's not fair, and I don't want to be that. So I try to put it back on her. All right, you pay for it if you want it. And that was just like, we've had the same policy for 4 years. It's yes or no. It's like, no, they're assigned. We don't change them. Otherwise, it's a fucking headache. But she kind of took me to the point, because she's also my neighbor. And I would never hear, I just never hear the end of it. So I said, all right, fine, your choice. You have to make this payment. Now it's in your court. So if there is an option to kind of do that, to do it. And if there's not, then I guess you can't.
Well, there's something like that where it can become really heroic. Like at some point you're going to watch Chernobyl, and this happens a couple times in there, where they've had this meltdown, and if they don't drain the water from underneath the plant, there's going to be like an explosion and fucking everyone's going to die. Everyone's fucked. And so someone's got to go down there and drain the water. So they need 3 people. Well, those 3 people are going to go right into the heart of all the radiation. Probably they're not going to survive. So who's going to make that decision? Is the leader just going to randomly assign 3 people? Or what happens in the show, it's this heroic moment where they present the scenario to these workers, and then, 3 people heroically stand up like, okay, and they say their name, like, I'm going to sacrifice myself for the greater good. And at least in storytelling, like, I think that happens all over the place. And like these heroic sacrifices, when it's on them, when they get to make the decision, where it's like, I'll take it on, it's a heroic action.
Yeah, I doubt that happens I feel like that type of stuff doesn't happen as much anymore.
Like, I think there's a lot of putting responsibilities on others. Like, that's a big part of our culture now, is blaming other people, throwing a lot of responsibility on them, and not assuming any of that responsibility on yourself. Like, in the culture war, I think that's a big part of it.
If you could narrow it down to something specific, it's personal responsibility, rather than I'm going to be either the victim or I'm going to place blame somewhere else.
Well, the person who's preaching this is Jordan Peterson, right? He's like famous for saying, clean your room before you tell your neighbor to go clean whatever, right?
I was just going to say
he's famous for that. And Marvel is, what's the super Nazi called? The Red Skull? Is that his name?
Yeah, I think that's it. Red Skull.
So whatever. Recently, they started hinting that the Red Skull is like a Jordan Peterson character, and so they're vilifying. So I mean, that's the culture war, right? Like, one side is the guy preaching personal responsibility is a super Nazi demon. He's the worst possible thing, and that's just so weird. Like, I don't understand. This is where it's really hard for me to understand both sides.
Yeah. And that's like the Twilight Zone stuff. Just how divided those two are now. It's just, I think there used to be more of a crossover, like, oh, we're ideological, but still you have to take care of some of your stuff. Now it's just like, nope, you're either it's perfect and everyone's got it equal and fair, or it's not. And there's like not a lot of in between.
I don't know, we're just in a really weird spot where, like, obviously the world is not perfect and there's a lot of problems and things need to get done in the wider context, but it's sort of hard to imagine that happening without people becoming sovereign and finding themselves individually, right? Like, we need to work together as a clan, as a society, as a family, but the best way for that bigger scale to work is to have the individual pieces functioning well, right? Like, you could be an authoritarian and force all the individual pieces to function a certain way. Like, I think there are certain governments that are doing that in the world, forcing the citizens to act a certain way. Or you could have a lot of freedom, but those people have to be functioning, have to have some mental stability and be functioning well enough on their own that they can rely on each other and then create a bigger thing, a bigger society.
And maybe the change a little bit in why it's not working is just like how you said, where either, they just kind of tell you the way it is, or you trust the people to kind of get their shit together, think for themselves, and handle stuff the way that they want to do it for themselves. Well, maybe nowadays, just the way, I don't know why it shaked out like this, but people don't want to take that personal responsibility and, sort out what they would want to do. They just kind of want to jump on a boat, go in with a tribe, someone telling them what's good or what's the way to do things or how to think. And if that's more the mentality of people now, then it's going to skew towards, let's just have people tell us what to do, which is like more authoritarian or whatever, versus what the USA at least was founded on, which is, well, let's let the people, they can sort, what is best for them out on their own. Let's let them do it, and then they'll tell the government what to do. And now it's kind of switched of like people don't want to take on that responsibility. They're like, well, fuck it, you know what? Like, I don't know. Like, let them tell us what to do.
What would you predict at this point will happen in the next 10, 30 years? Because I don't see how any of this is going to work itself out. Like, I'm seeing this trajectory. This is like sort of in the same area, but slightly different, where like we are becoming more and more sensitive over time. Like, I experienced this at school where like obviously you have to be sensitive to the kids in school and you're trying not to traumatize them. So you're going to be as sensitive as you possibly can. But while that's happening, the outcome doesn't seem to be good. Like, I don't see the kids developing any better in this more sensitive environment. In fact, I see the exact opposite. Like, the world is being more sensitive to the individual's needs to fit into society. But the effect is that the kids are becoming more sensitive and less functional over time. Right? And I don't know what the answer is to that, because like, I think you could argue that having, like, if there's hurdles, if you have to overcome hurdles, it can make you a stronger person, right? And so if you have a really strict, like I hated sports, but I hear people who have gone through sports talk about how strict their coach was, like how much that changed their worldview, and they were becoming more self-sufficient and they could overcome things. And when tiny obstacles came in their way, they had grown, and so they could overcome those obstacles. So was it good that they went through this harsh time when they were young, where the coach was being too aggressive, if they grew up to be more functional adults? Or is it better for that coach to be more sensitive, and then those people grow up and they can't function in the real world because it turns out that not everyone is going to be as sensitive as they are? Like, I don't know what to do about this. Like, I'm just seeing culture change, and we're trying to be more open to everything, but the result seems counterproductive. Like, I don't see people changing in a more positive way. They're not becoming responsible for their own shit. They're becoming less so.
Yeah, I think it's like a fine line, like a coach or something being too harsh on a kid, but that we've veered definitely a little too far in the other direction.
And I'm really sensitive, right? So like if a coach was harsh to me, that would traumatize me. And maybe that would really hinder my self-development. Who knows? Like, I feel like, or at least growing up, I felt like I was particularly sensitive, more than the people I saw around me. And so it makes sense that I would want to live in a world that was more sensitive to me. I just don't know that that actually would benefit me. And I don't know that it benefits the greater society. Like, if everyone was looking out for me, well, we wouldn't have ultraviolence in movies, right? Because I'm really sensitive to that. So that's it. No more rated R movies where people are getting their heads blown off. I mean, that's half of the movies that come out are people getting their heads blown off. And so those all have to go away because I'm too sensitive, right? Is that fair? Like, does that make a better world just because it's something I don't like and I think, whatever, like I have a problem with? Should it go away? Should I snap my fingers like Thanos and then all of the things I don't like go away? I don't know.
I think it's hard to get to that level unless they're telling you basically that they have all the answers, or that they're saying you can't, they're telling you this is the way, and if you do it another way, you're just wrong. I think as long as they're not telling you this is the only way and like being kind of like that toxic type of person who's just, if you don't believe this, you're wrong. Then I think me, more sensitive people, would be fine with the firmness, as long as it doesn't slant into that toxic level of like, nope, you don't have an opinion, or you don't get to be your own person because this is right, this is correct. And as long as the coach isn't saying that, I think, especially nowadays, a little bit of toughness or whatever is good. Like, let the kids become their own people and think for themselves. Be a little tough, be a little firm. Yeah, as long as they're not breaking that rule of just saying, I don't know, just being, I guess, toxic or ugly and saying you're wrong if you're doing it the other way and you're just a gross type of person, then you're kind of good. And right now, I think we definitely lean towards the softer approach, like nobody's being too firm or aggressive.
Like the way I'm looking at it, where like I think the answer is obviously sort of in the middle, not being too soft, not being too firm where it's toxic. Like there's some middle ground where people will develop well. But then the question is, how do you define that? What are the specific rules in the way you're supposed to talk to the people you're coaching? So who's going to decide that? I think that sort of society should sort of decide that. I don't want to be authoritarian. I want us to all figure that out together. What is the best way to function? But I don't see us coming to any kind of good conclusion. Like I don't see society functioning well to come to what should be the structure. Like we so disagree on what the structure of society should be that I don't see how it can solidify in any kind of way. I guess it shouldn't solidify, but I don't see it even approaching the right zone.
Or what I'm just thinking now is anything short of authoritarian is okay. Like as long as you're not being authoritarian and say it's this way or the highway, that's like the fundamental rule. If you're not breaking that, I'm going to find it hard to believe that I'm going to think you're too harsh or whatever. You're pushing them too hard.
But there are laws, right? So there are laws. You can't murder someone, right? That's a law. That's a rule.
But that's
fair. An authoritarian rule, right? That's a firm rule that you're not allowed to break. So...
Yeah. But that's fair because you can, you think for yourself, do whatever you want to do until you infringe on somebody else's ability to do what they want to do. And killing somebody is definitely infringing on their rights. And even not killing them, just saying, hey, if you think like that, you're wrong and I hate you and I'm just going to yell at you or whatever. So as long as you're not, breaking that fundamental rule, infringing on their rights, I mean, that's one that I feel like almost everybody agrees with, right? Like if you murder somebody, you don't have that choice. That's not your choice. That's why the judicial system is there for, or whatever, is good. Is like, do whatever you want, but you cannot take away somebody else's ability to, live their own life.
So that's a very extreme example. What if you're very sensitive and if somebody's clapping very loudly by you, that actually is traumatizing because like the loud sound of clapping really hurts your ears. Should it become illegal to clap because that has a bad effect on people?
No.
So how do you draw that line though? Like what obviously murder is bad and we're not going to allow that, but we are going to allow clapping.
Yeah.
And then where do you draw, like there's all of this area in the middle where I don't know.
No to the clapping because I feel like it's just such a minuscule percentage of people that if you clap, they're like, ah, and they have to cover their ears. It's like maybe 1 in 1,000. So, we can't.
So it's a numbers game. Like if you are less common than 1 in 100, we're not going to worry about your sensitivities.
Yeah.
So we should not have wheelchair ramps.
No.
See, I think this is unanswerable. I don't like. I have no answers here.
Look, all I know is I wake up and I'm tired and I'm groggy, and then I get out of my bed and I just make that bed. I tuck the covers underneath, put the pillows on, and walk away. Then I turn back and I look and I go, my bed's made. And then I walk out of the room and I go, all right, I made my own bed.
All right, well, I got to pee, so we're going to end the show.
Yeah. All right, perfect. I'm going to stop recording.
All right, thanks for listening, everybody. I guess we don't care if you're listening. All right, bye.